Great. So thank you, everyone. And we appreciate you being here. This is the second one of these workshops that we've done last year, ending in actually May of this year. The Region 1 coordinators for the Community Resilience Partnership worked with the other regional coordinators around the state and the other counties to put together a learning series online called Building Stronger Communities. And we were going to do that again, but we decided instead of that format, we wanted to target in specifically on the requests that you all had made as Region 1 communities for some more specific, like hands-on workshop type focused conversations around particular topic areas. So we basically, over the next few months are going to be honing in on those topics that you've all asked us to take a look at. And climate action planning was one of them. And the workshop that we are going to offer tonight is sort of a part 2 of that, which is social vulnerability assessments that might be happening outside of a climate action plan or be part of that climate action plan. And then also a huge piece of climate action planning and also any type of planning is engagement, and particularly equitable engagement. So that's going to be the other part of our evening workshop tonight, which will be at 6 o'clock. And we'll make sure to put a link to that in the chat before the end of the presentation or the end of the workshop today, in case folks haven't registered and they would like to. So just to get started, a little overview of our etiquette on Zoom here. But just also, if you haven't already and you want to put your affiliation or your town along with your name on Zoom, so folks kind of know like where you're calling in from. Maybe you represent an organization, maybe you represent a town, just to have that. And also, please use the chat to say hi, and we won't do like a round of introductions, but when we go to speak during the workshop time, we'll ask that you introduce yourselves. And a lot of us already, like, we know each other from the work we do, so I don't think we're strangers, but at the same time, just to put in context, and everyone might not know everyone else. So if you could do that, that would be great. And we love to have you on video if you're doing, if you're able to focus in and want to be on video. That makes the workshop piece a little more engaging. No pressure, but I know some people are eating lunch, so no problem there. So before we get started, I just wanted to do an intro of myself and the other folks on my team, just to put that in context. I think I know everyone here, but Gabe McPhail, I'm the manager for the Region 1 Coordinator Collaborative, which is the regional coordinating entity for the Community Resilience Partnership in Southern Oxford, York, Cumberland, Sagadahoc, Lincoln, and Knox counties. So I'm not alone in my work. I work collaboratively with Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission folks. That's Abby Sherwin and Karina Grader. I work with Sarah Mills Knapp at GPCOG. I work with Laura Graziano and Emily Robbie at Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission. And so we work collaboratively as a team, but we also are engaged with many service providers and technical assistants across Region 1. And a lot of those advisory partners who are part of our team are on our call today. So folks from GMRI, folks from the state. So we're really happy to have those folks here on the call, and just really happy to be working with them. So our format for these workshops is you get to listen to me talk, which you're doing patiently now. And then we'll jump into just a presentation portion of it, where we're just presenting sort of an overview of the topic that we're the content for the topic that we're addressing. And then really what we want to do is spend the majority of the time, at least 30 minutes, and then we have a sort of spillover time for 15 minutes after the hour. If there's additional like things people want to keep talking about, some of us will be able to stay on the call and do that. So this is really your time to not just ask questions, but if you have projects that you're working on, maybe some particular challenges that you're encountering in the topic area, and you want to use the wisdom of other communities that have gone through this or are going through it, the technical expertise that's on the call, this is your time to get some questions answered, to share ideas. So we'll really try to spend a good bit of that workshop time doing that and provide you with that opportunity. And then we'll do a quick wrap up. And again, like I said, there'll be 15 minutes after the hour sort of spill over if there's additional questions or things people want to ask, and there might be a particular thread that folks want to keep talking about. So I want to just, before we start too, is just introduce quickly, and they will, I'm sure, also share a little bit when they present, but just to thank, excuse me, the presenters who are like our content experts on the call today. So Sarah Mills-Knapp and Kelly Rayberg from the GPCOG Sustainability Office are going to talk about climate action planning, and then Kate Birch from North Star Planning, and Vina Scordas from FB Environmental are going to bring comprehensive planning into the conversation around climate planning and resilience planning. So happy to have them here. Thank you all for being willing to come and talk about your experience in this work. So I am going to stop talking and go off my screen share so I can turn things over to Sarah and to Kelly. And I will just ask, does anyone have any quick questions or anything before we launch in? I just want to make sure folks are comfortable with where we're at. Okay, thank you, everyone. And I'll turn it over. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gabe. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. For those of you I don't know, I'm Sarah Mills-Knapp, the Director of Sustainability with the Greater Portland Council of Governments. So our sustainability team has been doing a fair amount of municipal climate action planning for a couple years now. We started our program in 2020. Really in response to a lot of requests from communities to help support varying levels of climate action, whether that was doing planning or actually implementing some actions they had already identified. So we created a process that we've really been building as we're doing it. So it's been a learning process for sure. And this is by no means the only way to do climate action planning. There's a lot of very valid processes that I think it really depends on who is implementing the process and what type of community that you're working with. We think of our process as fairly flexible, but with a fair amount of rigorous best practice in it that we have really sourced from a couple different sources, both nationally and internationally, in terms of best practices for climate action planning. But also locally here in Maine, which I'll dive into some of the resources a little bit more. But just as an overview for the process, it really starts with a sort of data collection process through which you try and get as much data as possible with regards to creating a GHG emissions inventory and a vulnerability assessment. So those two components really create the foundation, the baseline foundation for the data that you need to start to do the action planning piece of it. So in most of our communities, we try and create some sort of advisory committee, volunteer committee, or team. A lot of times one might exist, or we're adapting one. So we'll work with our municipalities to do that. For the most part, we are delivering these services directly to municipal governments, who are then engaging with the committee and volunteers to create a climate action plan. In some of our smaller communities, we are working more directly with volunteer communities, volunteer committees who are working to help build a community climate action plan. So it really just depends on the size and the capacity that the community has. We try and focus in on community engagement. I'll talk a little bit about that, but I think there'll be a deeper dive tonight. Identifying data sources and understanding, where we'll be getting data from, and I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. And then one of our first, I've kind of highlighted in yellow here, the more public engagement components. We have an initial workshop after doing a lot of the data collection. So once we create an emissions inventory and have a baseline, we have a workshop in which we kind of dive into some of the baseline data around vulnerability and the emissions inventory, so we can start to engage the public in that discussion of the baseline to understand, like, what have we missed, what are communities or populations we should be engaging more deeply with, and just start to have conversations about, helping the community understand what their baseline is. A component of this is working with a committee and with the council to set an emission reductions target. Generally, that is what drives the action planning section of the process. So we try and help the committee. We have a modeling tool which we do our GHG emissions inventory with, which is called ClearPath, and that modeling tool helps you create an inventory, but then also helps do forecasting, so understanding what emissions you may have in the future, and then create pathways for reaching certain emission reduction targets. So we will provide all of that data to committees and help the committee make a recommendation to their council or select board. Not every community necessarily wants to do this or feels the need to set an emission reduction target. The communities that we are working with so far have, but I know in smaller communities this might be a challenge. So it's by no means 100% necessary, but it is really a best practice to sort of understand what direction you're moving towards. So then we go into an action planning process through which we have a priority setting workshop with, which is a public workshop where we start to understand what are the values really driving the communities, and what areas of climate action plan do they want to be focusing most on. There are certainly some, if you set an emission reduction target, that you sort of absolutely need to do to reach that target, but then there's a lot of activities that it really helps to understand what the values of the community are to help drive in that direction. So then we'd really do some drafting of the actions. We do a lot of council engagement to help them understand what they're seeing before they see the full climate action plan. Provide opportunities for public comment, and then really work with communities to do implementing and a tracking approach that really helps, ensure that this is an actionable plan and is something that is monitored and measured. So this is an overview of the whole process, just to go dive in like a little bit more. Our community engagement really is driven primarily by the communities. We want these plans to be from the community and for the community. This is not a plan that is GPCOG's priorities, kind of pushed onto the people. We want this to be reflective of the communities. So we try and get the committees in these communities to drive the community engagement as much as possible. There's a broad range. It's not just the workshops, but we do surveys. We like to encourage committees to do tabling, educational webinars through libraries, like lots of different ways to engage the community outside of just public workshops, which are sort of not always well designed for everybody to attend, especially like evening workshops or that kind of thing. So we try and hit all different types of community engagement to make sure that we're getting a broad and inclusive feedback on the process. We've had a lot of committees that do really direct focus groups or interviews or engagement with other committees across different topics in the town, so we can really engage as many stakeholders as possible. This is just an example of our greenhouse gas inventory data requests. So in the data collection in the beginning, we really want to get as much information on the municipal operations, but also the community-wide, who is the utility providers, what type of fuels are generally used in the community and in municipal operations. So just sort of getting that really organized in a way to get that that request to municipal government and to get it back in a very organized way is very helpful. So we have found this as a really helpful tool to just keep everything in one place and start to track, who have I reached out to, who do I need to email again? This process of data collection for the GHG inventory usually takes about 3 months or so, depending on responsiveness of people, so 2 to 3 months. We also have kind of a similar vulnerability assessment data request form where we, the vulnerability data needs, we have a lot of regional and statewide data from the state climate action plan that we use. There's a lot of tools to help understanding climate hazards at the regional level, but we also do really need a sort of deep dive into the local on the ground data. And actually, I'll just go to this real quick. Our vulnerability assessment is really looking at the climate hazards, so getting the regional and statewide data on the types of climate hazards we can be anticipating, understanding then the local kind of existing social vulnerabilities, and then understanding the local infrastructure and ecosystems to know what kind of impacts we might see. And as an output, the vulnerability assessment is really fairly spatially based, looking at mapping and understanding the high-level overview of climate hazards. This is not an in-depth site-specific vulnerability assessments. We tried to look at the whole town. We look at a broad range of impacts and resources that are in the town. Try to understand, certainly at 2050 at least, what are the impacts that might be anticipated, and especially on ecosystems, infrastructure, and populations. So a little bit of overview there. This is just a little bit about emission reduction scenarios. We usually give, we try and show 2 different pathways. One is aligned with the state climate action plan, which this is actually, these numbers are a little adjusted. So the state climate action plan is referencing a 1990 baseline, and most of our communities are looking at using their inventories from 2019 or 2022. So we sort of adjust to those numbers and then give them an option, which is a science-based target, which is really aligned with a Paris Agreement pledge to prevent global temperatures by increasing by more than 1.5 degrees. So it's sort of giving them an opportunity to understand, what would we do to just align with the state, and what could we do to have a more aggressive emission reduction target. And this is just an example of one of the outputs we have from the ClearPath tool, which is looking at, what are at each target range. So at 2050, looking at the types of actions that may need to be taken, and the percentages and absolute numbers of homes that might need heat pumps or cars that need to be transitioned. So this, this can be challenging to really get down to, because this is a modeling tool. This is really not very specific. When people see numbers like 562 buildings, they feel like, it's very exact, but it's really just meant to give an understanding of the scale of action that may be required. So this does help in sort of guiding the types of action plans, actions that we start to flesh out with towns. So these are just some examples of the work that we do. Here's some more examples of the vulnerability assessment data that we use. We do sort of in-depth interviews with department heads in the municipal government to get information on the types of infrastructure that they're managing, what they know their town best do in terms of providing services. So we try and engage as much as possible with the municipal staff and with committees as well, who may be working in the town, or be engaged with other types of community-based organizations. Then moving into the climate action planning section, real quick, I'll just wrap up. Our climate actions are sort of presented at a sector level. We identify strategies that are higher level, and then we dive into the actions that can help achieve those strategies. So we want to really give our communities a roadmap to achieving the actions, not just sort of broad level strategies, but what do you really need to do to push the needle in this particular strategy? And these are not meant to be prescriptive, but they are sort of meant to be actionable. So we go through a lot of engagement with our communities in order to understand what they can actually think is feasible to achieve and what is practical. So we want these actions to reflect what they think is doable within their towns. I think that's it for now. We have recently, one of our first communities we started doing climate action planning with, Falmouth, has adopted the council adopted their climate action plan a few weeks ago. So that will be coming out publicly soon. And we're working with Freeport and Yarmouth and Brunswick and Cape Elizabeth and North Yarmouth. So we have a lot of communities we're engaged with right now. And really, this was meant to be a high level review. It really is different in every town, but this is kind of the general process that we go through. So happy to hand it off now to Bina.
Thanks so much, Sarah. We really appreciate it. And we put Sarah and Kelly's contact information in the chat. And just to let folks know too, after the workshop, we will send out a whole resource list that will include all the links that are shared in the chat, plus the slide deck, plus the recording, and then contact information and other additional resources related to the topic area. So as Sarah mentioned several times, the communities, depending on the size of the community, the capacity, where you're located, climate resilience goals or community resilience goals can appear in a variety of different plans. Not every community takes that information from vulnerability assessment or inventories and applies it to a climate action plan. It might be integrated into other types of plans. So I'm happy to have Kate and Bina on to talk a little bit about comprehensive planning, other types of planning in which these climate and community resilience goals are integrated. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gabe. I will attempt to share my screen now. And all right, that's working, right? Cool. Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Kate Birch. I am a planner with North Star Planning. We're a small general services planning firm based in southern Maine that does kind of general work throughout Maine and northern New England. We do a lot of comprehensive planning, as well as other types of planning like downtown and open space plans, ordinance work, and things like that.
Hi, and I'm Bina Scortis. I work for FB Environmental. I'm a senior project manager here. We do a lot more environmental water quality specific projects, and we really like to work with folks like Kate at North Star to enhance any planning efforts that they have going on to make sure that there's an environmental component, as that does seem to be more of what communities want to see and hear. And we've done a lot of watershed management plans that have been turned into vulnerability assessments or climate action plans based on the needs of the communities. So excited to be here.
Great. So first, I just wanted to give a quick introduction. I think a lot of you probably know this already, but comprehensive planning in Maine, what is it? A comprehensive plan is basically a high-level vision and values-based plan that takes a look at an entire community with usually like around a 10-year or more view. And in Maine, what is in a comprehensive plan is based on the Growth Management Act and a state required checklist of different data, different goals and strategies and things that need to be included. And basically towns are required to have a comprehensive plan in order to assess impact fees and to get some types of state funding. So this is something that a lot of communities are going to prioritize having one of these plans in place. And what Bina and I wanted to talk about is how you can integrate both, whether it's your existing climate work that your town is already doing, or whether you want to use the comprehensive planning process to maybe start to address climate goals and climate planning in your community. So I have this giant chart here, which you'll be able to get a better look at, I think, when Gabe sends the slides out. But basically, each of these boxes is one of the 13 required inventory chapter topics in a comprehensive plan in Maine. And you will see that climate is not one of the things that you're required to talk about. But oops. However, I think you can relate climate to every single one of these topics and identify different goals and strategies, or maybe areas where your town needs to do more assessment related to every single one of these. Some are more obvious, like natural resources and water resources, agriculture and forestry. You might kind of automatically think of climate related goals for those, but even in your population and demographics work for a comp plan, you can start thinking about vulnerable communities or how your population might change thanks to climate change. Or with like historic and archaeological resources, you can use that space to start thinking about energy efficiency and upgrading older buildings, making resources resilient to sea level rise and things like that. So I think this is sort of just meant to be a way to show how climate ideas can kind of start permeating every aspect of your comprehensive plan, if that's something that is important to your community. And we wanted to give a couple examples of how some communities have been approaching this. The first one is Bath, who is in the process of approving their comprehensive plan. And the city of Bath had done a lot of climate work already. They had done a greenhouse gas inventory and a plan to reduce emissions. They've done some sea level rise vulnerability work, and they had done that all before they worked on their comprehensive plan. So what Bath decided to do was to actually include an additional inventory chapter in their comprehensive plan beyond what the state requirements are, that detailed all the work they'd done so far and kind of inventoried those climate related conditions, and add goals and strategies related to climate as kind of top level in their comp plan. And then I'm going to turn it over to Bina.
Thanks. And we're also working with the town of Yarmouth, who decided to also incorporate some climate goals into their comprehensive planning process. But instead of it being an additional chapter, they wanted to understand how does it impact those areas that Kate was mentioning earlier. And so what we did was we looked at, you know, the natural resources, the housing, and did some climate connections, climate call outs, made sure that people in the community understood how it's all related, and what those connections are, because I think it's really important that we don't just have these silos of information. That's why we have a comprehensive plan, and we need to make sure that we're including climate change, resiliency, vulnerability, all those words, and those actions into our comp planning process. And through, I guess, next slide. So throughout these processes, you know, there's a lot of public engagement, and I think Sarah hit the nail on the head really well with talking about how they've done a lot of engagement, and I've been impressed with how we've all been able to work really well together at different consulting firms and different, you know, GPCOG, SMPDC. Everyone has different ways to do it, and I think it's really helpful that we all work together and learn from each other and sort of figure out who are those vulnerable populations, how do we access them, and what does that look like. And then also understand, like I was saying, make sure that there's connections. So when you have a housing specific public forum, are you also addressing drinking water supply? Are you also addressing road infrastructure? And I know that it's hard, you want to have some specific conversations, but you need to make sure that people are understanding where those, you know, the Venn diagram overlaps. Because, you know, people do wonder, you know, is climate change, or is housing a climate change issue? Like, of course it is. And how is it, and how can we address it? And working with our planners and working with public works departments, working with all the different departments to figure out what that looks like, what that means, and how does it actually impact your comprehensive plan.
Great. I also wanted to mention that you can integrate these climate goals in other types of planning your town might do. A lot of communities might do a downtown plan, especially for economic development initiatives, but that doesn't mean that you can't also find a way to have all your climate goals in there too. I think a lot of the goals you see in downtown plans about green space and walkability, about electric, you know, your streetscape can include electric vehicle charging and new streetlights. If you're on a waterfront, which most Maine downtowns have some relationship with the water, you can also be talking about flood resilience and sea level rise. Open space planning is another thing that a lot of Maine communities will take on because we have such access to outdoor resources here. So this is another way that, even though an open space plan is really about land conservation, community values, maybe balancing conservation and recreation, that's a place where you can incorporate a lot of related climate goals into the planning process. And I keep saying goals, but also a lot of public outreach regarding climate into these planning processes. So you can sort of understand the community's vision and what the community values most, and what kind of work the community wants to see happen related to these issues, and where they overlap with climate resilience.
And then I think a big piece that we wanted to end with here was just, you know, we can have all these great plans and all these great, beautiful documents that say what our goals are, but how do we actually make these projects happen? What is the project? How do you prioritize them? And how do you fund them is really a big question. And this picture is actually from a project we're working on with Topsom right now. And the Topsom Fair Mall, we got a bunch of money through the 319 grant funding project or process to sort of implement stormwater infrastructure, and what does that look like, and how, and then understanding that connection to their, you know, any climate goals they might have. And some communities might not be able to pass any, you know, robust climate action goals, but they might have planning goals that actually are climate goals. And so really working with what, you know, what language works for your community. Some people really want to talk about climate change. Some people want to talk more about resiliency. Some people want to talk about water quality. And so finding what works, you know, in just the language with your community, but then also finding what funding sources are out there to actually make sure that those projects that you identified with all those, through all those engagement sessions, through all, you know, the whole planning process, let's actually make things happen. And so we'll make sure that you guys have a list of these funding opportunities. And I know that Gabe is the queen of finding money for towns, which is great, because I know that she really wants to see implementation happen across this state. And I think we all do. And that's why it's so important and amazing that we can all work together and have these sort of forums to share these types of resources.